What up y'all, it's Dom, and today we're talking about my top 5 cameras for photo or video under $1,000 right now. Let's get into it. Without a doubt, the most frequently asked question I receive, whether it's from hobbyists or beginning photographers, is what is the best camera I can buy right now? What's the best cheap beginner camera I can buy? And that is why I'm making this video. Now before I begin, I want to assure you that I've actually shot and had my hands on all 5 of these cameras. I've used them quite extensively. I've owned 4 out of the 5. Which just goes to show I waste way too much money on cameras. But I've owned these all, I've used them, I've tested them, so I have firsthand experience and knowledge with these recommendations. I'm gonna start with my least favorite to most favorite, so stay to the end for my highest recommendation. Let's get started with number 5, the Nikon Z50. So the Nikon Z50 came out a couple years ago, and there's some things I really love about this camera. It's got good battery life, shoots in full 4K with no crop, 14-bit RAW photos with 11 frames per second, which is faster than other cameras on this list, dual dials front and back for manual controls, and overall just an excellent user experience. It's a very user-friendly camera, so for beginning and hobbyists, it's a great option. For the video side of things, this camera does slack a little bit. There's no in-body image stabilization, there's no log profile, so you can't really get heavy into color correction. Most notably, it's got a really terribly designed flip-down screen. I think that was the biggest thing that held this camera back in terms of sales. You really can't use it for YouTube or vlogging or anything like that, because if you put it on a tripod, it blocks the screen. You can't see yourself at all, so you're going to need an external monitor. That being said, if you can work around those issues, I put it on this list because it's actually a really great value. They've dropped in price since they've come out a couple years ago, but most notably at $856 new for body only. Don't recommend that. But look at this, on B&H right now in the used market, it's at $642.50. Now, for a full 4K no crop camera and an excellent photography camera, that's a hell of a deal. That's why it's number 5 on this list. Let's move on. Number 4 on my list is the Canon M50 Mark II. Now, I'm sure you've heard of the M50, and this camera is very widely known in the beginner camera scene. I recommend it because, again, it's an excellent value. $699 with a kit lens, $599 without a kit lens. But again, let's look at the used market here on B&H right now. They're used with a kit lens for $565. I've seen them body only under $500. That's a hell of a deal. Now, in terms of features and specs of the M50 Mark II, really quickly, it's got a 24 megapixel CMOS crop sensor. Excellent sensor, puts out really good photos and videos, excellent colors. On top of that, it's got dual pixel autofocus, which is class leading. It's a really, really good autofocus system. So for both photo and video, you really don't ever need to worry about missing your shots. Perfect for a YouTube camera or shooting yourself for content creation because it's got a flip out, fully articulating touchscreen as well. Just a really, really nicely put together camera. Now, this camera is also not perfect. The M50 II and Mark I have a glaring flaw, and that's that they are basically unusable in 4K. Canon really dropped the ball here. It's got a huge crop. It loses its autofocus system. The quality of the 4K footage really deteriorates. It's just junk overall. So you have to know going into buying this camera, you can only shoot in 1080p, which I urge you, think twice on if you really need 4K footage. If you're just starting your YouTube channel or TikTok, this camera shoots really good vertical video and is great in 1080p. So an excellent value. That's why it's number 4 on my list. All right, number 3 on my list is the Sony ZV1. Now, I've owned 4 or 5 of these cameras. I absolutely love them. They're fantastic cameras and a hell of a deal, coming in new at $748. Now, this camera is actually different from the rest in that it is a point and shoot design. So the camera is built in with the lens on it. It cannot be removed. It's got a really, really good 24-70 f1.8 to 2.8 lens. That's just kind of fancy talk for a really high quality lens that can shoot shallow depth of field, good in low light, and you have a nice little zoom range on it. It also has one of the best autofocus systems I've ever seen with real-time eye tracking autofocus, both in video and full 4K footage, so you don't have to worry about that. And the onboard mic is fantastic, one of the best systems I've ever used. So really for a vlogging, YouTube camera, behind the scenes type camera, this camera can do it all and do it really well where you don't need additional accessories on it. That's why I think it's an excellent value at $750. Now, it has been out for a little bit of time too, so I've picked these cameras up used all day long for $600 to $650 range. I've even seen them as low. I think I bought one actually for about $540. I bought 5 of these at one time because I shot a live performance where I needed footage going from multiple different angles. So I had 4 of these or 5 of these going all from different angles as like B, C, D angles. it was actually worked out perfectly. One of the reasons why I love this camera so much is because it has log profiles. So the profiles on this camera are very similar to my full frame professional cameras that I use for video. So when I edit up the footage in post, I can match the colors and color correct just like I can my pro bodies. So that makes this a perfect accessory camera for professionals out there. Now that may not be super important to you as a beginner or a hobbyist, but it is really nice to know that this camera can future-proof your video editing capabilities as you learn and grow. Now this camera also isn't perfect. It does have a few flaws that you should know about. Number one, it's not wide enough for vlogging in my opinion, because it doesn't have optical image stabilization in body. It uses a digital image stabilization to crop in a little bit. And at 24 millimeters on the absolute widest, that crops into about 30 millimeters to get you any type of smooth footage, which is just too cropped in. It's gonna crop in really tight on your face. So because of this, I recommend this wide angle Ulanzi lens that you can connect on the front. I'll link it in the bio below. I own one. It actually works really well for vlogging, but with that lens, this is the absolute perfect, most minimal setup for vlogging. Another flaw this camera has is it doesn't have an electronic viewfinder. So if you are that shooter that needs to have your camera in your eye, this is not going to be the camera for you. Also, this is a point and shoot camera, so if you want to get into like professional headshot photography or taking on clients for photography, you can't show up with a point and shoot. You'll get laughed out of the building. Aside from that, this is an excellent value. I love these cameras. I will always have one in my bag. Great value at number 3. Let's move on. Number 2 on my list of top 5 cameras under $1,000 is the Fuji XS10. Now I actually put out a full review on this camera. I'll provide the link below. I named this camera last year my best camera under $1,000. This camera does everything really well. Excellent for photography, excellent for video, for full 4K, real-time eye tracking, autofocus, front and rear dials for manual controls. Does have an electronic viewfinder, so if you are primarily a photographer or want to get into photography, you could shoot professional work all day long with this camera. It's really great. I would shoot this camera no problem on a wedding right now. I shot some client work with it when I was testing it out. I absolutely love it. Also has a fully articulating touchscreen, so it's perfect for YouTube or content creation. Overall, this camera is just great. I don't have really any flaws with it. The autofocus is a tad slower than Sony and Canon. It does fall off there just a little bit, and it is a little bit bigger body than some of the others on this list. But overall, it's at the top of the price point at $999, but if you can afford it, highly recommend this camera. It doesn't fall off anywhere. You will love it. I love this camera. The reason I sold this camera off after I bought it and owned it for quite a bit of time was because it was an additional Fuji system that I had to invest in lenses, and I don't have any other Fuji cameras. So it's kind of stupid for me to just buy all these additional lenses. I only shoot Sony and Leica right now, but I really love this camera. I actually am tempted to jump into the Fuji lineup if they had a full frame camera. I would be there. To be honest with you, I love everything about this camera. The only reason it's not number 1 on my list is because of the price. You are paying top dollar at $999. And these are not super popular cameras, so I don't see them a lot used. So you're gonna pay full market value for this camera. I do think it's worth it, but let's take a look at my number 1 option. Number 1 on my list is the Sony ZVE10. Now this is a newer camera, maybe about 8 months old now, and Sony just delivered. They knew the market, they listened to what the consumer wanted, and they delivered. This camera is an outstanding value, best value on the market, hands down. It comes in at $698 for body only, $798 with a kit lens, and let's get into some of the features. It's got a 24.2 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor. This is a proven sensor that's in the A6600 and a lot of previous models. Really, really great for photos and full 4K video. Has a 3-inch fully articulating touchscreen display, shoots full 4K up to 30 frames per second without a crop, unless you need the digital image stabilization, which I actually like the digital image stabilization into this. Doesn't have optical, but it crops in a little bit and smooths out the footage quite well. Shoots 11 frames per second raw with a decent buffer there. Has class-leading autofocus. So this also has the real-time eye tracking autofocus all the way in full 4K and in photos. Just, you will never have to worry about it. Honestly, it's the best system on the market right now, hands down. Also has some really cool features like a background defocus button. This also is on the ZV1. But if you don't want to learn about settings or fuss with it, you just press a button and it sets all the settings up to blur the background as much as possible. It's really cool. This camera's also got a really cool feature where it prioritizes your face to be exposed properly, so you never have to worry about the background being perfectly exposed and your face super dark. It will adjust in and out of settings to make sure that your face is always perfectly exposed and in focus. So that's really nice for beginners. It makes you like focus more on the story or the video that you're trying to shoot and worry less about settings. So I think this makes it the most user-friendly camera on my list for sure. Another feature I love is the directional 3 capsule mic. It's really great. If you're within 3 to 6 feet of your camera, you don't need an external mic because this thing sounds so good. It isolates your voice and removes the background noise, and it also comes with this custom wind muff on the top. So if you are outside or in any type of wind, it cuts down to really nothing. Perfect for vlogging. This is a perfect vlogging, content creation, YouTube, TikToker camera. Like, this is the camera that was built for you. So if that's you, don't even think twice, get this camera. Now, this camera also isn't perfect. It does have 2 glaring flaws. Number 1, it doesn't have an electronic viewfinder. So if you are a photography first artist, I probably wouldn't go with this because I love shooting an electronic viewfinder. If I'm shooting any type of client work, this is not the camera I'm gonna go with. Number 2, it does have something called rolling shutter. And that is when you're shooting 4K video, if you move your footage side to side quickly, it's gonna look a little bit jello-y if you have vertical elements in your shot. Something you can avoid if you just don't swing the camera a lot or move it around side to side quickly, then you don't have to worry about that. Not a huge deal breaker, but something you should know. Now, another flaw of this camera is right now it's back ordered pretty much everywhere. So they are kind of hard to find, but you can find them. I actually found one used a couple of months ago that I picked up for $560 body only. Freaking love this camera. It's the one that I use for behind the scenes or vlogging or content creation all the time. This is my go-to camera. Highly, highly recommend. Now, I do have a few honorable mentions I'd like to talk about. Number 1 is the Sony A73. That's actually a full frame camera, probably the best all-around camera on the market right now for the value. Don't buy those new. This is the reason why this camera is on my list. It's probably the best value on the market right now. If you can stretch your budget a little bit, these cameras started at about $2,000 new, and then they dropped to about $1,800 now that the version 4 came out, the newer version. But I'm seeing so many professional shooters, myself included, bought this camera when it came out because there was nothing else on the market like it. And now they've all upgraded and they're selling them off. And now Craigslist and the used market is flooded with these. I've seen the A73 going for as low as $1,200 right now. Now, those may be well used. You may need to look into conditions or whatnot. But if you can stretch your budget from $1,000 to $1,200, $1,300, the price difference there and the value that you're getting is exponential growth. The A73 is probably the best value on the market, hands down right now. I also want to mention the Nikon Z5. Similar to the Z50 that I talked about, the market is kind of soft for the Nikon Z5. So you can really find that camera on a fantastic deal. That's a buyer's market. I see them on B&H right now going for $1,037. And that's a fantastic little full frame camera for that price. Definitely something you should look at. Lastly, my honorable mention and my winner of this list in the past is the Canon RP. That camera is coming in for about $800 used right now. Fantastic value for photographers only. I don't recommend it for video, but if you are a photographer first and only looking to shoot photos and get into maybe wedding photography or client work, that's a fantastic option for you as well. Now, if you are thinking about buying any of the top 4 out of the 5 cameras that I've recommended on this list, I've created more in-depth reviews. Those are the cameras that I've owned. I didn't own the Nikon, so I don't have an in-depth review for that, but I'll link those videos in the bio below. I'll put some up at the end of this video. I appreciate you guys for watching. I hope I saved you some time, brought you some value. If I did, hit me with a sub and a thumbs up. I'll see you soon. Peace.